I'm Dr. Sarah Florini. I'm the interim director of the Lincoln Center for Applied Ethics, and I am so pleased to be introducing Kishonna Gray, who is with us this week as our visiting scholar. Dr. Kishonna Gray is an associate professor of writing, rhetoric, and digital studies and of Africana studies at the University of Kentucky. She is also a faculty associate at the Berman Klein Center at Harvard University. Dr. Gray is the author and co-author of numerous books and articles, and I mean numerous, including her foundational 2014 work, Race, Gender, and Deviance in Xbox Live, Theoretical Perspectives from the Virtual Margins, and 2018's edited collection, Woke Gaming, and Feminist Play. And most recently, she has published Intersectional Tech, Black Users in Digital Gaming. And because she just can't stop being productive, she also currently has a book under contract with NYU Press entitled Black Gaming Studies, which, and I'm editorializing, it's not in the bio she gave me, but will literally probably be field defining. She is highly sought after as a speaker and regularly addresses both academic and industry audiences, such as the Game Developers Conference. She's the winner of numerous awards over the last few years, including the Evelyn Gilbert Unsung Hero Award and the Blacks in Gaming Educator Award. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Kishonna Gray.
The most important part. And we're like friends. Like, I don't know why you didn't start that. She made that like real formal. I'm like, girl, if you don't sit down, we are friends. Like, we have been connected a long time. Like, our origin story takes us back like over a decade. Oh, more than 15, close to 20, probably. Like, it's really wild. And it's so, I was just reflecting on, like the growth of the field that we were like a part of, especially like, digital culture, digital studies, but really like Black digital culture. It was like a few of us like that were in that space. And, Sarah, Andre Brock, Catherine Knight Steele, Miriam Sweeney, like we've been here. We've been out here like for a while. And I know like for a long time, we had to like remind folks, especially when a lot of these disciplines discovered technology and discovered the discovery process is really interesting because we're like, oh, that's cool, but also cite us and cite our work too, So I'm really excited to be here. And this is like a homecoming, I'm in here, y'all. I'm gonna try not to cry. I see some of some of you might not know, but I did my PhD here at Arizona State in Justice Studies, and Dr. Nancy Jurek is here, and she was part of recruiting and getting me here. My mentor, my late mentor, Greg Cavender, he just passed recently. But I remember, there were so many stories that I had remembered, and I just remember that he took a chance on me. Oh, I'm trying to cry. Oh, I'm trying not to cry. But I just remember him taking a chance on me and my research. And I remember he recruited me because Hurricane Katrina had just happened. And I was doing, like some cool stuff like around networking. And so we didn't call it network analysis or social media like at the time. But I wanted to change that project because it was a heavy project. And I wanted to change to gaming because Tim, my office mate, and also Dr. Johnson is here. So many OGs like in Justice Studies are like in this room. And I owe y'all everything, for why I'm here right now. It's because of, that radical program that y'all had the nerve and audacity to create. Like, it's really beautiful. And I'm really glad we had it. But I remember that Tim was doing, his ethnography of like EverQuest, this gaming stuff. And nobody did like game studies like in that way. But our program was like, hey, if there are any kinds of conversations that we need to talk about related to justice, oppression, structural inequalities, then we're there. We need to be like talking about it. So I'm really thankful, for like the program, that I went through, and it really just made me like the scholar that I am today. And so I'm glad to be here. And what am I talking about? Listen, the titles never match like what I talk about, but I'll find some way to bring things like full circle. I remember the title came from a conversation. Karina, we were all talking. We were like all on a call, and I think somebody was saying that needed to be the title. So it's probably just a placeholder for right now. But with some of the things I wanted to talk about here is just to kind of You can look at my talks as like episodes of like your favorite TV show that's like disconnected and disjointed, but there's a through line eventually that will get there. You know, it's not like a movie of where things are seamless and you're following. So just kind of follow along, and we'll get there. When we need to get there. Again, I think this is also the first event that I've been at that has had all of my books in one place. So it's really kind of cool to see. So shout outs, to you lovely humans like at the Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center? Is that what's called Lincoln Center, right? Okay. For having that. I really appreciate it. And one of the places that I want to start was it's a really recent thing that happened. I consider myself like an accidental scholar of a lot of things because I just accidentally happened into some spaces and places. I better hold this. I might be stepping back. A couple months ago, I was tagged in some posts on all media. So on short here, do I need to keep it in there? Okay. I'm so sorry. I'll put it back because maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Okay. So I was tagged in some social media posts and they were like, "Oh, Kishonna, look, this might be interesting to you." And so I went there and there was two posts. There was that quote right there, and then that was like the little caption that's right there. I was like, "Oh, cute, the metaverse." I don't do things with the metaverse. I think the metaverse is silly. I'm gonna tell you why it's silly, because gaming has been doing the metaverse for so long, and people just need to pay attention, to these intricate, immersive, interactive spaces, because gaming has been him for a long time, right? As the young folks say, I'm him. But there was this quote here also. So within the metaverse's intricate tapestry, I seek stories that amplify voices often silenced. It's a space where virtual experiences can mend real world divides, fostering empathy and reshaping narratives. I'm like, "Oh, that's cute. Who is she?" Because I was like, I thought, we know most of the black, especially black women inside this space. Like we know, if we don't know them personally, we know of them. I had never seen her before, but there was a reason, because she was me. And I was like, okay. I was like, hold up. What you mean that's me? And so the organization, I won't call them out right here, but the organization that like posted this, they said, "Oh, we were very inspired by your work and your scholarship, and we wanted to share that with our network. So we have this workshop. And if you'd like to come, feel free, but we're also just going to share your work." I was like, "Okay, that's fine." And then they said, "We thought that you would be flattered by our usage of AI to generate an image from you." So my initial reaction was like, "Oh, okay, that's cute." Second reaction was like, "Well, at least she black." Because especially in the AI space, there was a lot of times where, it's very Eurocentric features, but I'm like, okay, she got a full face, she got a full nose. I see the little Afro things happening there. But then the third, and I think the lasting emotion that I've had was erasure. So if none of you knew who I was, some of you, this is probably your first time seeing me IRL. And if somebody said Kishonna Gray is coming and they made you pick who Kishonna Gray was, it might maybe 50-50. You might not pick the right one. And maybe in the future, I'm also thinking, I'm like, if somebody sits down to like Google Kishonna Gray, I want, will she pop up? And then what kinds of conversations does that mean, right? So I was like, listen, they're trying to clone Kishonna out here. I think actually Andre Brock actually said that. He was the one that said they cloning Kishonna out here. But there are a few things that are guiding my thinking, right? And one of the main ones is that a lot of these technological tools and these platforms, they're engaging blackness without engaging black folks, right? What do I mean by that? We are also in this era of like anti-DEI everything, right? I'm not a DEI scholar, right? But people lump me under that. But what does that mean? If people can finally do diversity without black folks, right? I'm reminded of a conversation from not a conversation I had, but Levi Strauss. They said they had a problem with diversity. And they said, well, we can use these AI tools to generate diversity and we won't have that problem anymore. I'm like, okay, it's beyond red flags. I'm like, flag on the play. Y'all got to chill out with all that, right? And then one of the other things that I think is like very concerning is that we have this representation without embodiment. There's a person named Shudu. Shudu is a very popular Instagram influencer. And, there are millions of followers in there, but she's not real. So if you were to look her up right now, a really beautiful black woman, but she's not real. She doesn't exist at all. Now, one of my concerns is that this has actually given, a lot of these institutions basically a pass to have to, stop engaging like with black folks, stop with the complicated relationship and the contentious relationships that we often have. And especially in the fashion space, in the fashion world model space, I was reminded of what I learned about Grace Jones, Naomi Campbell. They created the term diva to reflect them. That was a term specifically reserved for Black women who don't know their place, right? So during that era, Naomi Campbell, Grace Jones, they were advocating for more pay and more money. They wanted more say in their likeness. They wanted more say in what they were wearing and what they had on. And the fashion houses, they came up with this concept of like diva to refer to them as, right? And so there are so many like kind of conversations that need to be had inside this understanding of representation without embodiment. But there are three things that I also want to like focus on, and that's on like conversation around not erasure is the last part. The first one's enhancement, alteration, and then erasure. So many of us like engage in the alteration phases right now. If you post anything on Instagram and you put a filter on it or you do Photoshop, so we've utilized a lot of these kind of machine learning AI tools like anyway, right? And they have just kind of they're just like on steroids now, right? That we can create entirely new people without having like any kind of engagements or connections at all. I'm going to read a few things, especially since this is humanities. I remember the first time I went to a humanities conference, I didn't know what to make of everybody reading their presentations, but I've come to love it and fall in love with the reading, right? I'm not going to read too much, but a lot of times, I've written some really cool words together and I want to read them to you, right? Come on, cool words. Media continues to be a site perpetuating necropolitical logics of Blackness. Just as the patterns of continued anti-Blackness in the world manifest in digital spaces and help us make sense of larger desires of white colonial supremacy, especially with the continued attempts to remove and destroy racialized peoples and pasts. Just as the world is deadly, so is gaming, especially for its Black characters. Media exists within a larger social landscape that renders Blackness illegible for full humanity, thus leading to hypervisibility, invisibility, erasure, and death. I engage the necropolitical tensions between Blackness and gaming as a technological structure of white supremacy. Games urge for an immersive engagement of the material conditions of the body. While the body in gaming might be a digital rendering of hegemonic conceptualizations, there are discursive realities in which we must contend. Gaming, as a narrative and immersive text, facilitates a particular kind of discursive arrangement wherein ideological structures are on permanent display. Racial and gender hierarchies are produced on the assembly line of power in gaming. They become sites of very little contestation as Blackness becomes merely a mechanism to propel an action or storyline forward. The construction and uses of racial subjectivities fuel the logic that Black identity can be encapsulated and folded neatly into a system of consumptive entertainment. It is imperative to critically interrogate the technostructure that engages in this form of anti-Blackness. I got some examples to make sense of all of that. Okay, just so you're aware of like the content that you're watching, hopefully I'll make it bigger, but I'll explain to you kind of like what's happening. But there's death in here. There's violence. There's death. So it could be some heavy themes in there. So I just want you to be aware of that. The game and TV adaptation of The Last of Us, what you're seeing on your screen. You all might have watched the TV show The Last of Us. Yes, it was a game first, just so y'all know, it was a video game first. The Last of Us is a space that helps to make sense of the necropolitics of Black death that pervade the gaming industry. The Last of Us, the game can be understood as a space where the creators had the sovereign right to kill trans characters and characters of color. It was decided that certain bodies would be sacrificed for the movement of the larger plot for the white protagonist.
Where's Abby?
To quickly summarize, The Last of Us is centered on white girl, white womanhood throughout the entire series. We follow the world of Ellie and her quest to survive apocalyptic conditions, although she is immune to the virus that has turned most of the world into zombies. The game introduces us to several Black girls and women who come into close proximity to Ellie, only to be met with their demise soon after. The narrative world that was created protects Ellie and destroys Blackness, In one scene, the scene that you're watching right now, the game forces us to kill a Black woman on behalf of Ellie.
Where's Abby?
The game will not progress until we press the square
I'm
button.
fucking dead anyway. Why would
While
I
the
tell you
creators of this
anything?
game admit that there is an egregious amount of cruelty, it's justified, as it is a revenge narrative written inside the apocalyptic genre. And while there is an extreme amount of death, the treatment of Black death is beyond just a quick and to the point death. Black death is unlike
Think
any
about
other in
what
the
he
game
did.
because a Black woman is
How many
condemned,
people are dead
stripped
because
of her
him?
humanity, and is purposefully unmade of her personhood.
Next chance.
One of the things that's very concerning about this game, it'll be, there's this concept inside gaming called ludonarrative dissonance. And so this ludonarrative dissonance, it's when the narrative of the game and the mechanics of the game are incongruent with one another. So for instance, in this example, that's the moment where it's telling you to like kill her, right? It's making us completely in her death. And in generations and iterations of games before, they'll just give you like that cut scene or like a cinematic cut. But the fact that they made us have to like do this and engage with this, there's like a certain level of cruelty that most of us we weren't playing with, right? We didn't appreciate that. A recurring trope within game narratives is the continuation and reiteration of racism's colonial form, violence. And while gaming is not intentionally a carceral state, it operates often under these carceral logics which surveil and criminalize Blackness. Game narratives, especially violent ones, are driven by the extent to which it can extract labor and destroy bodies. There has been a history of troubling and stereotypical narratives when it comes to representing Blackness, as well as exclusionary and discriminatory practices of Black folks inside other gaming spaces like streaming. And with this logic, there is the continual haunting of slavery. Black characters in games, much like Black folks in reality, are haunted by the specter of whiteness. This lingering presence in the creative minds of the gaming industry indicates a desire to go back to the realm of supremacy and oppression, which is often the only way to make sense of all the Black death inside gaming. Battlefield 1 serves as a great example in making sense of this.
October 2016. Swedish company DICE, published by American company Electronic Arts, released its award-winning first-person shooter, Battlefield 1. There was much acclaim upon the release of the 10th installment of this series, and additional interest because it was the first to feature Black military personnel in significant ways. The Harlem Hellfighters are the opening act, if you will, fighting alongside the French in World War I. The opening moments in the game witness French, British, and American forces defending against German attacks around 1918. But the game's opening provides us with a brief respite from war and struggle. It rightfully opens with the musical selection, Dream a Little Dream of Me, when we see a Black man resting peacefully in his bed. This peace and slumber is interrupted by a white hand gently touching his right shoulder as to motion him to wake up. So when he opens his eyes, he is thrust immediately into battle. We awake on the ground, as if we were knocked out briefly. Our comrades quickly reoriented us to the fight, but it's almost as if we are in an in-between state of dream and reality, and we still hear the music. Say nighty night and kiss me. Just hold me tight and tell me you miss me. While I'm alone and as blue as can be, dream a little dream of me. We then shift our attention to a fist battle between two men. We now have a weapon in our hand, a Winchester semi-automatic rifle. The camera pans to our face and we begin to accept the reality in which we are in, war. The game then fades to black and words appear on our screen, orienting the viewer, the audience, to what is about to come. You're not expected to survive. The concluding line of text is very chilling and unnerving, but for many of us who are accustomed to military shooters, we take this in jest because most of these games are full of death and gore, but we respawn and ignore the larger ramifications of this symbolic death. The next scene is where actual gameplay begins. So most users ignore the emotional roller coaster of an opening and put on our gamer hats and begin to wreak havoc on the digital lives of NPCs, non-player characters. We pick up our weapon and look for enemy combatants. We fight and shoot, and we ignore the warning that the game offered. You are not expected to survive. We soon learn how true this statement is. We begin traditional gameplay, and it's a template shooter. We find the enemy, kill them, and avoid our own demise. And having played previous iterations of this game, the task is doable. But the gamer quickly recognizes that something is amiss with this gameplay. The enemy somehow has an innate ability to know where we are at every moment, and their bullets don't miss. It's hard to avoid being shot. We have to hide frequently to regenerate our health. Something is different with this game. I assume this latest installment has progressed in a way that the artificial intelligence has gotten smarter, and the machine learning more savvy to become a formidable opponent for its human, because we reach a point where we realize the game wants us to die. I point and aim my weapon towards the enemy. I'm shot from multiple vantage points, and the screen turns red. The gameplay slows. I try to reload my weapon, and it takes so long I can't retreat. I fall to my death. Based on my prior knowledge and experience with first-person shooter video games, I assume I will respawn at some previously saved checkpoint and get back into the fight. But something different happens. These words appear on my screen. Clarence Point Coupe, 1900-1918. I pause the game here and take a moment to comprehend what I'm seeing and experiencing. It feels like a memoriam, a way to honor this person's life and death. I actually have a strong emotional reaction to seeing and witnessing this, and to see the game honor that. At the moment, it feels beautiful, because it's also coupled with an on-screen narration of what war meant, a rite of passage. The camera quickly pans to another gun, a French light machine gun with beaucoup ammo. We have to quickly dismiss the death of our comrade, and we spawn into another life. This feels different. For other military shooters like Call of Duty and Gears of War, we respawn into the same life. We get a do-over. We can try it again. The action feels progressive and moving forward at a pace that we are not in control of. The war is raging regardless of our actions, behaviors, and moves. We get a hint from the game on how to use our weapon and how to improve its accuracy. I ask myself, is this entire opening scene a tutorial? Nevertheless, I comply, and the tip disappears. Weapon zoom. I quickly kill several soldiers progressing towards our opposition. They are increasing in numbers, and the game is increasing in difficulty. We take on heavy fire. We are blown from our position atop this hill. I don't die, so I pick up a weapon and proceed through a destroyed edifice. On-screen instructions caption the voice I hear in the game, telling me where to go. I listen. I comply. My comrades continue to die around me. I take the lives of several opposing soldiers with the weapon I've picked up. I run out of ammo. I pick up a pistol until I have time to reload the pump-action shotgun that has given me temporary success. But that luck has run out. The screen starts to turn red. I can't regenerate my health. There's fire all around me, and I have no way to escape. I'm going to die. James Johnson, 1892-1918. Another in-game memoriam honoring this fallen soldier.
We shift to another life on his way to his death. I try not to normalize the theme of Black death, but we quickly reach our demise as the war rages on and the trend continues. James Johnson, 1892-1918. Theodore Panola, 1892-1918. Death becomes more frequent, dramatic, and normalized. The memoriam have lost their impact as we realize the names are random and change with each game experience. Learning how to shoot the weapons and drive the machines become more novel than experiencing the final moments of these Black and brown men's lives. Black death is the tutorial for the colonial war machine, and the design feels intentional. Battlefield 1, among other examples, provide an additional lens, an inward investigation to white racialized policies to expand settler colonial supremacy. Video games are a vehicle and tool that disseminate ideologies of power and hegemony. These games reveal more about the innate character of the U.S. empire than sometimes other media do. Users and gamers learn vital theories related to racial formation, hierarchies, and the legacies of supremacist practices. And I have to offer this reminder that in the context in which Battlefield 1 was created and released, it was the year 2016. The U.S. empire had elected Donald Trump as its president after a targeted campaign of misinformation and disinformation aimed at vulnerable voters and social media users. The movement for Black lives was continuing to gain steam in the midst of so much backlash. One glance at social media, and one would assume that the increased focus on Black lives resulted only in more death. As conversations around the movement for Black lives increased in magnitude, so did the visibility of Black death. Take the events that unfolded after the death of Mike Brown by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. Visibility around the treatment of Black folks by the police aided in transforming public perceptions, social activism, and mobilization in a way that we haven't seen since television's flooded homes with images of Black bodies being assaulted with water hoses and German shepherds. And since the death of Mike Brown, George Floyd, and so many others, we have continued to consume Black death as hashtags, linking victims of police violence to a larger culture and trend of systematic inequality and the continuation of plantation politics and carceral logics. The hypervisibility of Black and brown bodies and then the mechanic to force death upon them is similar to the historical trend of lynching. This game reveals the failure to acknowledge institutional and structural forces that perpetuate Black death at the intersection of race, gender, and class. And adding the layer of the digital reveals the need to utilize a concept, be ready, like high-tech lynching, wrongly used by Clarence Thomas, but I think this is the right way to use high-tech lynching if we was really going to use it. Okay, I wanted to just read that part. Let me go on here. Let me go to this next part. I think also what's important, especially about the work that I'm doing, especially these days, and, is focus on like these concepts of like, what is play and like who gets to play. I think that we also have to think about like the conditions of play. And those are the things that kind of link the physical and the digital, right? Hopefully the next slide's Pokemon Go. Yes. Okay, good. Okay, the slides are acting right. Pokemon Go is the experience that let me look at those linkages, like that juncture of where the overlay of the physical is with the digital. So who knows Pokemon Go? Come on, Pokemon Go. Come on, Pokemon Go. So I was introduced to Pokemon Go in my days in Chicago, right before the pandemic. I was invited to go to the Pokemon Go Fest by a group of young students on the south side of Chicago in Inglewood. They were really excited about it. They were blurs, nerding out. They loved it. I was like, yeah, okay, I'll go. And so we were meeting up, and I was wondering, some time had passed and we hadn't met at that point yet. And I noticed I had some text messages that I had missed some calls and messages, and they said, Miss Kishonna, we're not able to get in. I was like, why can't you get in? And then I was new to Chicago. And I'm like, the optics of all these Black boys trying to enter that space, it disrupted the sensibilities of, of Chicago, right? And so I was like, you know what? Forget Pokemon Go, forget this fest, because based off of what they told me about Pokemon Go, we could do it anywhere. So from what I know about Pokemon Go, right, we just need like a phone or a mobile device, and we just need some network connectivity, right? And so based off of that, I'm like, oh, we probably could do this pretty much anywhere. And Chicago touted itself as one of the most wired cities in the world. There is hopefully the map is there. Yeah, so that's the hotspot map on the city of Chicago. Oh, I wish there was a bigger screen. So on the south side of Chicago in Inglewood, there's one blue dot. Now, I should have put the other map up here because the north side of the city, blue dots everywhere, right? All right, so I didn't know that. And so also when we were up there in the touristy area, Millennial Park, where the Pokemon Go Fest was happening, there were stops, Pokemon Go stops everywhere. When we got down to Inglewood, there was just this one. So I was like, okay, all right. I was like, we're gonna do this, right? Because it can be more of like an interactive kind of thing. So we're gonna go on over here. Once we got there, it was a statue dedicated to the Confederate dead. And so listen, it was a bad day. The day just went from bad to worse. Because I had to explain to them, I had to become a historian, like a monuments historian real quick, to help them understand why there was a statue to the Confederate dead in the city of Chicago. I also had to, let's see, as the other slide was there, I also had to explain the legacies of so many things. The legacies of racism, the legacies of Jim Crow, the legacies of redlining, divestment, white flight. I had to explain all of these intersections to help them understand why they couldn't play a video game, right? And that was also one of the things that was really significant too, is because we relied on the brick and mortar structures of the library in order to play, because the library had Wi-Fi that we could use. But there was an additional context in order for these young folks to even just cross the few city blocks that we had to cross to get to that statue. Oh, did I not put that up here? Oh, please tell me it's up here. Oh, yeah. So we relied on the public library significantly, but we also had to rely on just actual bodies in the street. So we connected with this group, Mask, Mothers and Men Against Senseless Killing. So basically, this group just occupied street corners to make sure that kids can just play. So basically, it was just a system that was set up. We will have somebody at one block, the kids will check in there. And then a couple of blocks later, they would check in like with those folks. And that's how a lot of black kids had to play, right? In the city of Chicago. And sadly, also during that time, right before the pandemic, I think one of the mothers that was on the street corner, she actually she got shot at just some random shots, right? And so she got killed. And so, in order to just play, right, when I go back to then asking those questions, about who gets to play and what are the conditions of play, when you add that intersection, especially of class and race, the conversations are entirely different. And how folks build and design have to be entirely different, right? And so, whenever I'm thinking about like this experience alone, there were all kinds of other things happening. I'm not sure if you all remember the phenomenon of Pokemoning while black. Whereas black kids would go into like a public space and they would be asked to leave. They couldn't just play in ways that their white counterparts were able to play, right? And to admit, like a lot of these gamers were kind of desecrating like land. They were doing some wild stuff. And so, but the company that made Pokemon Go started to be like a little bit more intentional, because I think the question that I asked is like, and the question of like whose data is it, right? I'm like, how do you get the information to even construct the map, right? That's a very important question. How am I for time? Because listen, I could just be talking forever. Y'all have to stop me probably. But I remember, okay, thank you. So in thinking about like whose data is it, I couldn't figure out how they generated the data to construct the maps for Pokemon Go. But we did find out later that a lot of them are they're very popular areas, touristy areas, areas that have significance, areas that have like landmarks. Those are some of the places that generated like the PokeGo stops like the most, right? Secondarily, like in the Kentucky example, hopefully I have because I've continued this in Kentucky. Um, maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't. Well, this is a map of old Lexington, basically the black neighborhood that is now the University of Kentucky in Rupp Arena. So that's another conversation. But in the Lexington context, they generated their data from the maps from the Kentucky Historical Society. So a lot of the historical societies, they have like this information like already. But the problem is the Kentucky Historical Society has a complicated relationship. I think they actually were before they were called the Kentucky Historical Society. They were the Daughters of the Confederacy. And so then you have to think about, because in looking at the map, darn, I don't have that up here. But in looking at the map, it's a very whitewashing of Lexington. The areas that you go to are not the black areas, not the brown areas, right? And so there was like a significant amount of like black history that could have been present inside this game of like Pokemon Go, but it just wasn't. And these are like design intentions, right? And then there are like these consequences of all these intentional things like related to design. And this quote that I had wrote like a few years ago really informed like the significance of like place, like physical space and physical place. So space is not just a passive backdrop to human behavior and social action. It's constantly produced and remade within complex relations of culture, power, and difference. And so many people think that gaming is a very neutral activity, but it's not neutral as all these examples, I've offered like provide. One of the things that I think was necessary, especially when it comes to, especially with the Pokemon Go project, I didn't want students to come away with it thinking that the neighborhoods that they're from, were less than or there was no value there. So we spent time and COVID took away a lot of this energy. But what we were going to do is like, there was like a little pilot project that we did where we went to the archives, we looked in the databases because I wanted them to see like the neighborhoods that they were from, right? And so some of them learned that the first Sears store, in the city of Chicago was right there, like in their neighborhood. They learned about like the generations of families who had lived in the neighborhoods before. They learned about German immigrants, Italian immigrants. They learned about like all these different like folks who were there before. They learned about like, like the Chitlin circuit that made its way from the South up to the North. They learned about like the Harlem Renaissance that actually was happening in Harlem. There was like a similar one like in Chicago. They learned about all these cultural things because and that was really like the purpose of it. it. Like, I didn't want them to just succumb to like the narratives that people often offer, especially about what being Black in Chicago and being Black in the world like offered. So that was really like the purpose. And I do bait and switch. So these kids be thinking they're gonna come and play video games, and then I have to teach them a few lessons or two, but they love it. I promise they love it. I promise I love it. Oh, this is a good one. Like, who makes the rules and do we need them? There was some more here, but I think the kerfuffle related to Uno really let me know. I'm not sure if you all remember this conversation on Twitter where Uno was reminding people what the rules were, and Black folks were not playing according to what the rules are, and Black folks do not care what Uno had to say. But I just said we don't, right? But I really thought this is going to be like the opening of like Black game studies. I just had to like put that in there. I told you I was like episodes that might be disjointed, but I promise there's like a narrative. I'm gonna stop there because I want to have a conversation with you all, want to chat with you all, and make some connections. So I really appreciate all y'all so much. Thank you so much.
We have a little bit of time for Q&A. I have lots of questions, but I will have time to talk to Kishonna later. So does anybody have any questions, things that they want to follow up on? Yes. Well, there's a microphone coming.
Oh yeah, because Zoom. So I ran into your work right after graduating undergrad. I did undergrad here in the Justice Studies program. Amazing program.
Let's go, Justice Studies.
I all like amazing work. So I was so upset at myself because I forgot, because again, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to that. But I forgot your first book at my house, but I have been needing to buy at least one of the others, so I bought one. But how does it feel going from Arizona,
Yeah.
where, I mean, 30 years ago we had a governor who was on record terrible racist.
Yep.
And then going to Chicago, where there's a flourishing community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then going to Kentucky.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in that, and how you feel about
Sure.
doing studies
Sure.
in those three different places.
As much as I talk about like how significant place is, I mostly don't pay attention to the politics of a place like at all. And I think that's probably like just one of those realities of like being Black in America. There's no perfect place. There's always going to be some issues and something happening somewhere. So then we focus like on the pockets of community that we can just build, and we focus on each other and just build with one another, despite what will happen. It's just ebbs and flows with like politics. But, as long we've maintained like communities of like connection with one another. And I think one of the through threads of all those places that I've been in is really just focusing on like geographically isolated youth. That framework has really just made so much sense regardless of the places that I'm in, right? So, I was in, Chicago, I've been in Boston, Phoenix, Arizona, these are like metropolitan cities, right? And then also, but I saw so many connections. I'm actually from Kentucky. When people think about like why Kentucky's home for me. And so whenever I think about being like in Kentucky, I think about the isolation, the geographical isolation, not having like connectivity, always being like behind the curve, always, being like left out of so many conversations. I don't want to use the word like digital divide, but I can invoke that like here, like in this moment. But then I also think about how people still piecemeal together, different kinds of things to still stay connected and still like be a part. And I think the beautiful things, especially that young folks are doing, are those things. So like in the example, like from like the South side of Chicago, like those kids didn't have internet at home, and how they got their phones. Okay, I'll tell y'all on this day. They stole their phones on the train. Okay, it's like a grab and go kind of. They explained. I'm so sorry. I won't put that in the book because I don't ever want them in trouble. But they explained to me like the whole process of like a grab and go, where they'll grab somebody's like phones. Now the Galaxies were the hot spot, where the hot phones like to grab, because there was a skin that you could get if you had like a Galaxy phone. Like there was like if you had a Galaxy, you got like a skin. People don't know who look like skin. You can get like an outfit, like you can get like a cool character, like in the game of like Fortnite. So many, because they wanted that and because they couldn't get it, they engaged in those kinds of like activities in order to like get those kinds of things. You remember, the skin? You know the skin, Tay? The phone was $1,000. You hear that, right? And then it was everything to have this skin. So like a lot of young folks were just like engaging to get this skin, right? And I remember at the time when we were working like at the public libraries, I think they were kind of talking like loudly about it. The librarian wanted to call the police, and I'm like, absolutely not. You're just not. They can get another phone. They got insurance on it. They'll be all right. And then she was like, she was questioning my ethics. I'm like, do you realize what will happen to these? They can get another phone. But do you know what would happen to these kids if they're consumed into the criminal justice apparatus? I'm like, we're just not doing that. But then I also realized that in order to have like relationships with like a lot of these, like the libraries and like public spaces that might host like a lot of these things, which is the reason I need my own lab, like because the protection in the space. But I had to like train them to receive these Black boys and these Black bodies, mostly Black boys, right? And there was other languages that they would use of like, they would frame them as like, you know, they're never reading when this is a library, they're supposed to read. I'm like, full stop. Like we're not doing that in here, right? We're not doing that. And I didn't even want to have to like justify all the learning that can happen inside of game. I'm like, I'm not even going to do that with you, because the fact that they're in here and they're safe and they're protected, then we need to do everything in our power that we can to ensure that they can just have like a childhood. So, and the similar, I've had less of that like in Kentucky, just because it's, you know, smaller kind of like scale. And so, but again, the same conversations exist. So there's the same narratives, you know, for like poor white kids, like in Appalachia, the same kind of conversation. So I'm always trying to like bring together like different communities and groups, especially like at the intersections, to just show the commonalities between these seemingly disparate kind of groups, and just recognize like how much in common they actually have. Yeah. Appreciate you.
I mean, that's where the Hood from the Holler title came from, is that now that she's back in Kentucky, Kishonna's doing some really amazing work with rural kids, rural teens. I think we have a question from the Zoom. Yeah.
I have a Zoom question from Marie, who says it's so good to see you, Kishonna, that is related. So tell us about parenting.
Is that Marie Provine?
Yes, it is.
Yes, ma'am.
She saw that. Who says, tell us about parenting in a gaming world. Should parents try to keep their kids from gaming?
Thank you. Our young person in residence says no. I think that's a very interesting question, because I think a lot of times when folks ask that question, it's asked in a genuine space of like care and concern around young folks, right? Now, I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of harms that can happen online, right? You know, the harms of harassment, sexism, racism, there's grooming practices, there are predatory practices. So these things are happening. Even like when we think about like how the alt-right kind of inserted its way into like gaming spaces, because they recognize that this was like a good pathway, you know, to recruit. You know, so a lot of like work around like neo-Nazism and like alt-right, you know, they use gaming. It's like it's like a space where those kind of things can happen, right? But I would say it's more of like parents need to become like more savvy, and learn more about what's happening inside the gaming space. So find out what kind of games it is that they're playing. You know, what does the online space look like? What does Discord, if they're in Discord? And so I say just having like an awareness of things, not being in there to invade their privacy, not that, but I'm saying just being aware of like what the possibilities are, right? Because I also just find that it's mostly like poorer families who have been subject to the assumptions about gaming that try to keep their kids away from it the most. Whereas, you know, parents with, you know, whose kids have like a lot of resources, they're in there and then they're showing like the pathways of like, okay, if you're into gaming, this is what careers could look like. And so much like when we think about like the gaming careers, like at the top, we don't see Black and brown kids. You know, these are not like poor folks that are in that space. These are highly resourced people who went to like those schools and those institutions of where they saw the value in that. And it was kind of, I listen to what I said to parents. It probably isn't true, but I'm gonna say it anyway in here. Gaming is the gateway to computer science, Mom. And that's why I said that. And that was like, that was it. That's the thing that like sold them, even if it's not true. I'll say anything just to get the kids in there, right? Just so we can give them the resources like to protect. But I would say that a lot of those misconceptions like about gaming actually keep so many like people out, but there are so many affordances that games allow, and I really want especially our kids, Black and brown kids, to take advantage like of those kinds of things. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Provine.
I think we can, I'm getting the one, meaning we can take one more question. So we see a hand over here. The microphone's coming.
Can you hear me? Cool. Thank you. So I loved your talk. It was great. And I was thinking a lot about, and this kind of fed really well within the last question. Where do you think like spaces of resistance can unfold and take shape within like communities that are online, especially like in gaming communities, and more importantly, like how can they be sustained?
Mm-hmm. Lucky for you all, you have one of the premier scholars who actually researches that stuff here, Sarah Florini. So make sure you write. There's a lot of folks who are writing in and around this space, you know. So Sarah Florini, Catherine Knight Steele, Sarah Jackson, Andre Brock, Meredith Clark. There are so many folks who have like talked about counterpublics and these alternative spaces and these third places, about how we have like built and can sustain like communities inside those, the digital. But I also think that's really important that, so I was just in a meeting like before coming here, and so many folks like look to the institutions like to create and make. And I think like that's the wrong way to really go about it. Like so many folks like on the ground level, it's just really like, you know, kind of grassroots kind of things. Most of the best things that are created inside the digital space came from the ground, right? The example that I want to offer is like trust and safety teams. I'm not sure if you know much about like the trust and safety teams, like in so Facebook, Twitter, Discord, all of these companies have trust and safety teams, basically to do content moderation and like protection of like people to make sure no harms are happening on their platforms. Those tools that we learned there came from these dope Black queer folks like on Twitter, and like the folks who were like subject to the harms of like Gamergate. They had to piecemeal together protections inside those spaces in order to be safe. And it was the companies that were like, oh, maybe we should implement that, right? Maybe we should do something about it. So so many folks like take for granted all of the things that you can do to protect yourself online. So how you can, you know, forgive the ableism here, but how you can disable comments like on YouTube, or, you know, how you can have like bots and you can filter people out like on your streaming and all your platforms. Like those things came from a place, and they came from a place of like neglect, where we neglected people. Even hate raids. I'm not sure if you all remember like a few years ago, like all the hate raids that were happening. So yeah, I know, right? It was wild. So many people have had to do something to protect themselves online. And it was these institutions that came in later and like, you know, like instituted them. Zoom bombing. Like so many people, like in the early days of Zoom, they looked to the digital spaces to say, hey, what do we need? So many like academic institutions were like, how do we protect ourselves like online? And that was before, you know, Zoom implemented all of these things, these safety precautions. So we owe so much really to like Black, queer, and trans like population, folks like online, you know, to offer like the protections that we have here. Yeah. It's not going to come from the institution. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, thank you all so much. Can we please give a round of applause to Dr. Kishonna Gray?